Hello there, everyone, and welcome back to Culture Underground. And today we are going to look at another comic book. I know, you're shocked. Well, it's my big passion here, and I think this one is one of the best independent comics out there. This is Girl Genius by Phil and Kasia Folio, and this is probably the granddaddy of all story-based webcomics. Now, I add the caveat there that there are a lot of very episodic webcomics that kind of went in the story-driven direction after a couple of years, or even just a couple of months, as in the case of Mega Tokyo, which really broke that way very fast. But this was built from the ground up to be an ongoing story, and that's partly because it did not start as a webcomic. It actually started as just an independent comic. I don't remember the name of the publishing group that published Girl Genius originally. However, that's what it was. It was actually a black and white, uncolored comic that was supposed to be sold in bookstores. And it's great. It's really, really great. Phil and Kasia Folio are longtime working artists. You may even have seen their illustrations in other venues. They did art for Magic the Gathering cards. I think they even did a few Magic the Gathering comics back in the 90s, late 90s or early aughts. They have done another independent comic series called Buck Godot's Zap Gun for Hire, which is quite fun. It's really kind of a hard sci-fi series with a lot of interesting concepts in it and a fun protagonist and the Winslow. But Girl Genius, I think, is where they really found their stride. And they've been working on this comic for a long time. I don't think they're quite up to 20 years yet. Maybe they are. When is the copyright in this? That would tell us, or at least give us a clue. Contents, omnibus volume. Oh, this is the omnibus, so that may not be the best indication either. The copyright could be of when the omnibus was published. Yeah, so the copyright in here is 2012, which is undoubtedly when the omnibus was published, as opposed to when Girl Genius Volume 1 was published. So this started off as an offline comic that they took online. I don't know what prompted them to really see and realize that potential in the webcomic medium. But there was already, I think, about 3 or 4 trade paperback volume-sized Girl Genius editions by the time they went as a webcomic. And there are upsides and there are downsides to that. The upsides are that the story has a level of craftsmanship and care and forethought put into it you don't see in webcomics. These were not people who just had a whole bunch of ideas they were going to throw against the page and see what happened with. They had an editor. They had people who were really working over that story. They had a plan. They went in very intentionally. And I'm sure there are a couple of webcomics that have done that from the beginning, but Girl Genius really hits a level of professional workmanship that is not present in a lot of webcomics. And that zaniness is part of the appeal of webcomics. Don't get me wrong. It's very important to have that kind of exuberance in your story. But Girl Genius hits the ground running, and it just never stops. Like, I don't think I have read more than a couple of pages of Girl Genius without being entertained by it. There are so many great concepts in this story. The world building is so solid. It is so meticulous in its character work that you can tell this is not just a couple of people having a goof. These are professional creators with a great deal of skill and care building a story for your enjoyment. And that's one of the things that makes Girl Genius great, as opposed to just good. So, what is Girl Genius about? Well, it's about adventure, romance, and mad science. The art style in here is a little cartoony compared to mainline comic books. Like here is a pretty standard example page. You can see it's got really great dynamic composition. We have these tall panels because Agatha and Gil are falling from the sky in this flying contraption that they have to fix on its way down. But they don't look like, your typical Big Two comic style. Well, I don't know. This could probably pass in Marvel these days. I don't know how I feel about that. I think a diversity of styles is good, but I understand the benefits that the Big Two publishers with their connected universes have in a unified art style. Anyways, artistically, you're not going to see the kind of evolution in Girl Genius that you will see in other comics, web comics specifically. There is some, because it started off as a black and white book. So while it's not a true black and white book now, they published this and they had the original pages recolored in kind of these muted sepia tones. And there is some significance to that, actually, which is quite nice. I like the way they did it, but we'll discuss that more as we talk about the story. Later on, we have much brighter colors, as you saw on the page I showed you before, and as you see again here. But there's not much evolution in Phil's style through this, and Phil does do most of the artwork. It's not that Kasia isn't an artist; it's just, it is a unified style for the book. So Phil does a great deal of the illustration. Kasia focuses more on the writing, and maybe they collaborate on this to a certain extent as well. But my understanding is that Phil does the lion's share of the artwork, at the very least, if not all of it. And so, again, you get something very consistent from the very beginning, but you're not going to see this develop into the kind of really striking art style that you might see in the Big Two books. I don't think that's bad, but some people will, and if you do, well, maybe webcomics in general, not your thing. Story-wise, Girl Genius is fascinating. It's a steampunk story. So it's set in the Europe of the 1850s to 1880s, maybe as late as the 1890s. But they have a much higher level of technology. And, if you're familiar with steampunk, the basic idea is the future came early. In the Girl Genius world, there are airships, there are robotic machines called clanks. Everything is largely powered by a steam engine or some kind of weird science mechanical device that they've put together. Because the really great conceit of Girl Genius is not the science or the inventions, it's the sparks. See, the tagline is adventure, romance, mad science, not just science, exclamation point. In fact, anyone who says science, exclamation point, is probably a crazy person. Sparks are mad scientists. They are everywhere in Europe. And the spark is an actual phenomenon. In fact, the primary antagonist of early Girl Genius, Klaus Wolfenbach, is trying to understand the spark, possibly so he can make sparks less destructive to the world around them. And Europe is just carved up into these warring fiefdoms, and they're all led, for the most part, by sparks. And sparks create fantastical pieces of high technology that defy all laws of nature. And then they unleash them on their enemies, which can be anyone from the baker next door who gave him a funny look to the owner of the barony next door. Or at least that's how it was. Then along came Bill and Barry Heterodyne. The Heterodynes used to be some of the craziest, most unpredictable, meanest, toughest sparks around. Bill and Barry were not. Okay, they were tough. They were intelligent. They had the spark, each of them. But they weren't mean. They actually helped the little guy, and they tried to stop these wars from going on, and they brought a certain amount of peace to Europe by carving up, by forging peace treaties, by forgiving their enemies, striking alliances. They managed to get about 3 to 5 years of peace in Europe. And then the other came. No one knows exactly who the other was. But the other destroyed Castle Heterodyne and murdered Bill Heterodyne's wife and child and sparked a new war. The Heterodynes went up and down the length of Europe trying to, bring things to a conclusion. And eventually, after about 2.5 years of trying, they did. Problem was they vanished. And then Europe collapsed without the Heterodynes to keep everyone peaceful. The only major player in the Heterodyne Alliance that didn't either die or vanish in the other war was Klaus Wolfenbach. Wolfenbach was the closest ally of the Heterodynes in their early days, but he left Europe after it became peaceful. No one's entirely sure why. When he came back and found the place in shambles, he had enough. He didn't do it the Heterodynes way, he did it his own way, and it worked. Now Klaus Wolfenbach rules Europe from the mountains of Transylvania to the walls of Paris. Nobody does anything without his say-so. It's a pretty dystopian place, Europe, under the heels of Klaus Wolfenbach. And into this situation comes Agatha Clay. Agatha is not a spark. Not exactly, but she kind of understands sparks, and she's trying to wrap her head around mechanics and get her degree from what is the name? I want to get the name right because it's a great college name that she attends here. I want to say that it is Transylvania Polygnostic, but that may not be it. Nope, Transylvania Polygnostic University. I got it right. Hey, look at that. It's very easy to remember names in Girl Genius because they're all great. But Agatha is a student there, and one day she loses her locket, which you can kind of see right there. Now, it doesn't seem like it would be significant, except she lost her locket when Klaus Wolfenbach showed up to do a snap inspection of her professor's laboratory. And she is assisted in the aftermath of this disastrous inspection by the Baron's son, Gilgamesh Wolfenbach, also pictured here. And this is where the romance part comes in, because she's quite taken with Gil, and Gil is quite taken with her, but Agatha isn't a spark. She isn't politically connected. She's not important. And Wolfenbachs have to keep the peace in Europe. So what's going to happen? What does it all mean? Well, it turns out that Agatha's professor was involved in some very unsavory technology left over from the other war. And everyone involved is kind of swept up in this dragnet. In the process, Agatha's locket is, as I said before, knocked off, and we begin to realize that there's more to Agatha than meets the eye. In fact, Agatha thinks she's not a spark. That's because her spark was deliberately hidden from her and everyone else. Because she isn't just a spark. She may be the last heterodyne. And into this very unstable political situation, a naive young girl has to come into her own as a spark, as an inventor, as eventually a political force. And her growth is perfect because Agatha doesn't really have the equipment to deal with all the responsibilities, the expectations, and even her own ideas as an inventor. And we get to see her grow from a naive young girl who doesn't really care anything about politics to somebody who has to lead the traditional heterodyne seat of Mechanicsburg out of its darkest days and back into a time of prosperity. And this story is not just an adventure story. It's not just a romance story, although it is both of those things, and it does them both quite well. It's hilarious. There are running gags. There are great characters. There is Othar Tryggvason, the gentleman adventurer, who is introduced with his own font, and who is always introduced with his own font, also always introduces himself. I'll see if I can find that scene for you because it's one of my favorite scenes. Yes, there he is, Otha Tryggvason, gentleman adventurer. Yeah. If you've ever read a Victorian era pulp novel, or Penny Dreadful as they were called, or if you've read pulps, if you like adventure stories, if you like sci-fi, if you like laughing at people with funny accents, because there's a fair amount of that in here as well, you're going to enjoy Girl Genius. There's just so much good stuff in here. For example, we have the Jaeger Monsters. Jaeger Monsters used to work for the Heterodynes. After they disappeared, they went to work for the Wolfenbachs, and they speak with this really heavy accent. Jaeger Monsters are actual monsters. They're green, they're furry, they have claws, and they speak like this, another stupid, easily too minion. Don't you know this is an insanely dangerous guy? Yeah, everything about them is like, even their sound effects. They don't clap, they clip, clap, clap, clap. Very well done, yeah. And there's so much fun and passion squeezed into every page of Girl Genius. There are signs in the background. Read them always. And yeah, if there's one webcomic you should try, it's Girl Genius. Everything about this story is here to entertain you. The characters, the story, the humor, it is all spot on. It's not preachy. It's not high-handed. It's not a lecture. It's just fun. You can't do much better than that. Anyways, if you're a Girl Genius fan, let me know your favorite Jaeger lines down in the comments below. Otherwise, tell me what you most look forward to reading in here. There's a like button and a subscribe button you can use as you see fit, and I will talk to you later.